Yesterday we began talking about the importance of being a good employee. As Paul was giving the example to a slave in regards to his master, the slaves actually had a choice in how hard they worked. In other words, that oftentimes when the eyes of the master weren't on them, they just stopped working. And he said, so don't do that. And so we, in our mind, we think, well, people are slaves, they have to work hard, they have no choice. No, they had a choice. And anybody who's ever been enslaved, if you've done any research on slavery and people in enslavement, you realize that they often figure out very clever ways to get out of doing work and to avoiding hard work and to get themselves into situations where they can even prosper under this circumstance. I don't want to go much deeper into that, but the whole point is that when we translate this concept into our place as workers, it's the idea that there are eyes on us 24/7, and they're the eyes of God. And that even though we may fool people, we're never going to be able to fool God. God knows whether we're being slackers. In fact, in Proverbs, he continually upbraids people who are slackers, who are sluggards, who are lazy, and always commends the concept of hard work. And when you go back to the creation, it says we were made by God to be productive. He said, reproduce. We find our fulfillment in being productive, not in being unproductive. And so the idea is that the more productive we are in our job, the more effectual we become. And one of the things I found when I used to take a lot of part-time work, that I would work as hard as I could, because I always believed this passage applied to me, that I needed to work, as he says, with sincerity of heart and with reverence for the Lord, that I'm working for God, I'm not working for these people. That was my mindset. I'm working for God, not for his eternal rewards, not for the paycheck that I hope I get. No, I was going to serve God. And one of the things I found is I continuously was being offered full-time positions, even management positions in these companies, because they saw how hard I worked. They saw how diligent I was. And, I had to simply say, thank you, I appreciate that. I'm honored, but I'm called to do something different with my life. I was called into the ministry, and that's why I was taking part-time work. But the whole concept was that the end testimony was, this is somebody who is honorable and integrity. I've never found anybody who didn't respect you for being a hard worker, especially if you're working for them. I found that they're often disrespectful of people who don't work hard when you're working for them, because they realize that you're taking their treasure without earning it. And essentially at the end of the day, I want to be able to say I've earned my way. I paid through hard work and hard effort. And that's one of the things I find even in doing these devotionals and even my Bible teaching. I quite honestly will admit I work really hard at knowing what I'm talking about and understanding what I'm talking about. I spend a lot of time. You can just ask my wife. If there's one complaint she has, is that I spend almost a significant amount of time every day of my life. It's something that's become really kind of part of my circulation system. But the reality is that I have to constantly stop and really make time for my wife and sometimes my grandkids and other things, because I am so committed to doing what I do faithfully. I don't do it the best. I'm not the best at this. There's people who are so much better than I am. I recognize that. But I know that at the end of the day, I can say, Lord, I gave it my best shot. I didn't hold back. I didn't kind of just try to get by. I didn't serve people warmed over donuts. In fact, I'll tell you a story on myself. One time when I first started pastoring this church, I was overwhelmed with responsibilities. And I just thought, God, I just don't have enough time to study and prepare. So what I did is I pulled up a series that I had done on prayer, and I thought, well, I'll just kind of dust it off and reteach it. And that's what I did. And I remember after I had finished teaching this series, I had an older gal who was my secretary. She had a lot of wisdom, a lot of maturity. And I came into the office one morning. I said, so what did you think about that series I taught? And she said, well, do you want to know the truth? And I said, probably not, but go ahead, give it to me. And she said, I felt like you served me warmed over donuts. And I just started laughing. I said, oh my goodness. I said, you're absolutely true. I just pulled something out of the hopper and dusted it off and really didn't spend time seeking God on how to share this important concept of prayer with God's people. That was probably enough for me. That was a good enough spanking from the Lord that basically, you could fool some of the people some of the time. You can't fool all the people all the time. And there's some people you can never fool. And she happened to be one of those people you couldn't fool. So saying all of that, it's important that we recognize when we do stuff, that we do it with real reverence and respect in our hearts, because once again, what does he say in verse 23? Whatever you do, it doesn't matter who you're doing it for, or when you're doing it, or how long you've done it, or how new you are at it, or how experienced or inexperienced you are. I mean, can we go through all of the kind of buts? We always want to put that contraction there. But God, you don't understand. No, he says, whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart. Work. See that word work? I mentioned the other day there are 7 million men in America and women in America who don't want to work. They're mostly guys between the age of 18 and 64. They don't want to work anymore. And they're just, you have people talking about this quiet quit. And I think for many people, they've done so little work most of their life, they're having trouble figuring out how to quiet quit because they really never have done anything. They're becoming unproductive. And you know what I found when people do those kind of things? They're miserable. They're miserable. They feel unfulfilled, unsatisfied. And that's why when we work at something and we do it with all of our hearts, and we're doing it for the Lord and not just simply for men and men's reward, he says, I give you a promise. You'll receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. And I don't think that necessarily means just someday in the sky when I'm in heaven, although it does include that. Most importantly, it includes that. But it also means that right here in this life, I'm going to receive the benefit of that hard work. Because he says in the end of the day, it is the Lord you are serving. I remember when I used to do work at janitorial service. Cleaning toilets. I mean, the one thing I found that was easier about janitorial was that Porcelain doesn't argue. You have counseling appointments, people argue with you. But here, Porcelain never argues. It always yields to the cleaner. But the whole point was that I had to sit back and say, okay, when I come into a bathroom, I want it to be as clean as possible. I want attention to detail. And so I poured myself into the attention to details. In fact, I was so concerned that people would run out of toilet paper that I started stacking a bunch of extra toilet paper rolls in all of the commodes so that nobody would have the chagrin, if I've had it a few times, where there's no toilet paper in a public place. That's a pretty horrible moment. And I stopped doing that for one reason, because people started stealing the toilet paper. But it's all right. It was mostly at church. But the whole idea was that nonetheless, I was always trying to think, how can I do this better? Not because I wanted to become a maintenance engineer by profession, but because I realized that sometimes the things that are the least attractive and the least pleasing and the least dignified are the things that become the most important. So when I have my septic tank drained every 2 or 3 years, I mean, I really am in admiration of these men who do this, especially the ones who I've learned do it with a great deal of integrity, because it's significant to me that my drain field is functional and it's in good operating order. And I want to know what I need to do to make sure that stays that way. And so sometimes we look at that saying, well, how does a person end up with a job like that? And I found in talking with some of these guys, they kind of fell into it. It wasn't the first thing they desired to do, but they found that they were really good at it. And that is one of the things that you really want to have people who are really good at. I mean, plumbers and electricians, builders, those people are critical to the happiness of our day-to-day life. And so I want to know that, and we've learned over the years, we work with people that we know are diligent, hardworking, and take pride in the things that they do and make sure that things are right, because they affect people's lives in very measurable ways. So whatever you're doing, you may not think it's the greatest thing in the world. I'll be honest, one of the reasons I love to go to Chick-fil-A is because, one, I'm addicted to their sandwiches, especially the spicy chicken. I admit it, I'm out of the closet. But secondly, I'm always impressed by the attitude and the behavior and the courtesy of the employees and the way they treat you with such amazing dignity. It's not surprising to me that the foundation is based upon the biblical principles of the Christian company. It makes the same way with things like Holly Hobby and things like that. You see it in the employees, You see it in the way they do business. They have an integrity because they realize that they don't just represent the company or their product, they represent Christ. And they care about that. And the more people do that, the more it will begin to have an impact upon society. The more people are saying, what is the secret ingredient? What's the secret sauce here? And the answer is, we do everything we do with all of our heart because we're working for the Lord. We're not looking for men. We're working for God. Well, we'll continue tomorrow as we shift the focus a little bit from the worker to the employer.